During the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land of Judah. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah went to live as a resident foreigner in the region of Moab, along with his wife and 2 sons. Thus begins a narrative we find in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, that comes here in the middle of the days of the judges. The days of the judges have not been great days for Israel. And they were not great days for this family that would come to leave Bethlehem in Judah to spend time in Moab. A reverse conquest, a return to the wilderness, an indication of all that has gone wrong. And this is what begins the book that we call the book of Ruth. Ruth in the English Bible is placed between Judges and 1 Samuel. In the Hebrew Bible, it is reckoned as part of what we call the Ketuvim, the writings. It is also one of the 5 scrolls of the Megillot. It is read along with the Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Esther, and Lamentations. And in some versions of the Hebrew Bible, you will find Ruth placed right after Proverbs, maybe indicating Ruth as a representative embodiment of the worthy woman with which that book ends, Proverbs ends. But in most times, it'll actually come after something like Ecclesiastes, Esther, that part of the writings. It is placed more chronologically in our Old Testaments because, yes, the events of the story in the days of the judges, because of the way the story ends up, we realize it's a couple generations before David. Therefore, it's happening around perhaps even the time of Samson turning into Eli, as we have between the end of Judges and the beginning of 1 Samuel. It's not a great time in Israelite history. The book, we don't know who composed it. We have every confidence in the inspiration of its author and the faithfulness and fidelity of the story that he tells. And it would have been written after David became king, so sometime after 1000 BC, and somewhere up until maybe the time of the exile. And it is telling events that are happening somewhere probably in that late 13th, early 12th century BC, likely. Probably the events in the first chapter probably take a few years. Probably the rest of the book don't take that long at all. So what is this story that we have here, and why is it here? Well, we find out that this family that has gone to Moab, again, this reverse conquest, the return to the wilderness, which indicates the faithlessness of Israel, right? And the consequences, there's a famine in Judah, which you remember in the law means that God is unhappy with his people and he is causing them distress. His name is Elimelech, his wife is Naomi, he has 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And we're told that when they get to the land there, Elimelech dies. But Mahlon, Chilion, and their mother Naomi remain in the land. Mahlon takes Ruth as a wife. Chilion takes Orpah as a wife. And then, tragically, Mahlon and Chilion die. We don't know what's causing their deaths. But now, Naomi finds herself alone in a foreign land, in Moab, with her 2 Moabitess daughters-in-law. Without men, they have no male champion. They have no one that can help them inherit or to give them any standing. They're in a very prone position in every respect. And so Naomi hears in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 6 and following that God has now looked with favor. Yahweh's looked with favor upon his people again, and that harvests are good back in Bethlehem and Judah. So she decides she's going to go back. And so as she decides to go back, Orpah and Ruth would follow her. And she insists on, don't follow me. Stay here, find husbands. They insist on going. She then expands on this. What am I going to be able to do for you? If I got married right now and conceived, it would take at least 15, 20 years for you to have for there to be a son for you to marry. Go, don't attach yourself to me. Go find somebody among the Moabites, their own people. Orpah is persuaded, and she goes. So then Naomi turns to Ruth. Why aren't you going? And this is what Ruth says. Stop urging me to abandon you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh punish me severely if I do not keep my promise. Only death will be able to separate me from you. Powerful, compelling message from Ruth. We need to understand everything she's saying here. She is a Moabitess. She is of a Moab. Chemosh is their god. They've lived there for many generations. And Elimelech and Naomi have come here, and it's not a good look. They're only there because Their people have been faithless in the land, and Yahweh has caused distress against them. This has not been the biggest advertisement for Israel or serving Yahweh. And yet, for whatever reason, Ruth has found something compelling about Naomi and her family, about Yahweh God of Israel, to the point where she is willing to abandon her people, abandon her heritage, and take on the heritage of Yahweh and Naomi and her family. When Naomi's family is at its least, again, what does Naomi have to give her? She is a widow, and her husband is dead, her sons are dead, she's got nothing. In fact, you see this very vividly illustrated when she enters Bethlehem, beginning in verse 19. Bethlehem's not that big of a village. People would notice, tongues would wag. She comes back in there. Is this Naomi? Now, Naomi means pleasant. And she says, do not call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Because the Sovereign One has treated me very harshly. I left here full, but Yahweh has caused me to return empty-handed. Why do you call me Naomi, or pleasant, seeing that Yahweh has opposed me, and the Sovereign One has caused me to suffer? And so, she's expressing her grief or pain. She's been broken by what she's experienced. It's worse for her because she left. Everything is awful for her at that moment. She's at her most, at lowest point, her most vulnerable. As chapter 2 began, we're told it's harvest time of barley. And we're told that there's this relative named Boaz. Boaz is some kind of relative of Elimelech. A second level, perhaps some kind of uncle or cousin or something like that. And so Ruth asks Naomi to be able to go in the fields. And Naomi gives her permission. And so we hear that Ruth happens to go in the field of Boaz, and she is trying to glean in the fields. Remember, in the law, provision is made that you don't harvest all your field. You leave part of the field there for poor people to glean so they have something to eat. It shows the abject, desperate poverty that Naomi and Ruth find themselves in. And we find in chapter 2 that Ruth is doing that. She's working hard. She's trying to protect herself, but she's in a very, very vulnerable state, very easily oppressed, exploited in every way, in any possible way, shape, or form. And Boaz's servants see this. Boaz comes in, talks to the servant, wants to know who the girl is, finds out that it's Ruth, and he knows somewhat of her story, right? And she asks if she can follow the harvesters and gather grain among the bundles so she has enough grain to feed her and Naomi. And Boaz told her, don't go anywhere else. Gather your grain here. Follow with me. Take with my female workers. No one's going to harm you. No one's going to cause you any problems. If you're thirsty, get water here where everybody else get water. And she bows to the ground, wonders, why are you kind and attentive to me even though I'm a foreigner? I mean, she's a Moabitess in Israel. Ethnic prejudice is real. It's been a thing. She would be the easiest to exploit and manipulate. She has no real standing. But Boaz is a man of integrity. Boaz is a man of honor. And he knows what she has done for Naomi, and how she has abandoned Moab to be an Israelite. And so he wants Yahweh to reward her, and he's going to help provide those rewards. And that Yahweh's protecting her through what Boaz is going to do. And Boaz encourages her to eat among them when they're eating dinner, gave her some extra roasted grain, and allowed her to gather among the bundles, which makes it a lot easier to gather. Right? Even takes them out so she has it, providing abundantly for her. She gathers it all up, and it was 30 pounds of barley, which would be sufficient to feed her and Naomi for some time. And so she goes back and explains to Naomi what happens in chapter 2, and tells that about Boaz, and Naomi affirms again that he is a close relative, and he is a Goel, redeemer, guardian. Again, this is part of the details of the law, something that Israel is going to continue to honor, something that we kind of find odd, and we'll see how it works as it plays through here. But for now, Boaz is able to help Naomi and Ruth in their condition. And so Naomi encourages Ruth to continue to stay there with Boaz in his fields, and she keeps doing that. Then in the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi explains to Ruth what she needs to do. That Boaz is a close relative and can redeem her. Now what that means is, in Israel there is provision made if someone dies without any kind of heir. If there is a daughter, like this issue with Zelophehad, and his daughters in numbers, the daughter can marry one of the tribe's members, one of the clan members, to keep the land among the people. But when a man dies and there is no descendant to carry on the line, to carry on the property, it was incumbent for the nearest male relative to marry the widow, take the widow of the dead man, and to have at least a child through her, by which the line would be continued. So that child would be reckoned as the descendant of the dead man, to be the inheritor of the estate. So in this context, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion are dad. Elimelech still has land. Elimelech has this territory that he had before he left. In order for anyone to inherit that land, Ruth has to have a child that will become, by proxy, the descendant of Elimelech and become the inheritor of Elimelech's estate. And Ruth says, so Naomi tells Ruth that Boaz can be that man if he wills. And so she needs to pretty herself up, to clean herself up, and to go and do what she tells him to do. And it's the time of the threshing floor. He's sleeping after having a fun night. And she crept up and uncovered his legs and lay down beside them. Whatever euphemism is involved there, we can't be sure. He wakes up, realizes she's there. What on earth's going on? Who are you? She says it's Ruth, and asks him to marry her. Because he is a Goel redeemer, a near relative. And he says that he wants her to be rewarded for this. You've not sought to marry one of the young men, whether rich or poor. You've done even greater deed by doing this here. And he says, look, there is a closer redeemer than me, but we will take care of this. I'll deal with this in the morning. He also makes provision so that, she leaves before anybody can see, as if anything went on. Did something go on? One of the great arguments of the age. And he gave her plenty of barley. So that they would have food, and as a testament for what she's about to do. Ruth returns to Naomi and assures, hey, everything's good. He's definitely going to do and deal with this before, the next day. And so the next day, we see the kind of thing that's going to happen at this time. Remember, it's the days of the judges. There's no centralized authority in Israel. And so it's all handled on a local level. So Boaz comes into the village of Bethlehem. As he's coming in, he sees that near relative. We don't know who his name. So the near relative, he grabs him, and then he gathers around the elders of Bethlehem, who be sitting in the village gate. These elders are older men of who are respected and men of authority in the community, and who are able to basically seal and attest about what's going to happen. And so Boaz says that Naomi, returned from Moab, is selling that portion of land that belonged to Elimelech. So I am giving you the opportunity to acquire that land, because again, when land's being sold, the nearest relative is given the first right of purchase, so that the land doesn't get all taken up by certain interests. The near relative is willing to obtain the land, but then Boaz says, well, you also then have to require Ruth the Moabite, the wife of the deceased relative, to preserve his family name by raising up a descendant to perform the act of levirate marriage with her. The guardian said he doesn't want to redeem it. He doesn't want to possibly ruin his own inheritance. And therefore he gives that option to Boaz. He raises up his sandal, which we're told at that time was the indication that he's renouncing his legal right, so that Boaz can take it up. And so Boaz does. Boaz then has attested in front of all of them that he was acquiring the field of Elimelech, and also Ruth the Moabitess. And the elders affirm it, and they all praise this and hope that God will make her fertile and to produce again in Israel, like Rachel, Leah, and of course Perez that Tamar bore to Judah, even though that story is incredibly awkward back there in Genesis, around chapter 37 or so. Boaz thus marries Ruth, and she conceives and has a child. And the village women praise Naomi. And in fact, when the child is born, Naomi takes the child, takes it on her lap, and becomes the child's caregiver. Because again, Ruth's child with Boaz is by proxy the child of Naomi, because it's the inheritor of Elimelech's estate. They name him Obed. And then we're told why the story's here. Obed will have Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. And the book ends with the generations of Perez. Tamar, Judah, Perez, Hezron, Ram, Aminadab, Nachshon, Salma, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. So the story's here because this is how we get David. It's a fascinating story, isn't it? So much going on there. And we've had to go through in detail and talk about it contextually, because a lot's going on that makes sense in a time that is very awkward to us, because we don't exactly have a levirate thing going on in our culture for various many good reasons. A few things to keep in mind about the text. It is possible that Boaz was unmarried and had no family, but we should not be deceived into thinking that that is definitely the case. It's very possible Boaz, especially being a man who seems to have some standing, would have probably already been married and had a family, and this would be a second family. Again, this would be completely legal under the law. There are times where men have multiple wives, and again, this is the requirement to raise up a family for his dead relative Elimelech. So a lot of times in some Christian subcultures, the woman's like, I'm waiting for my Boaz. Well, there's a lot more going on in that story perhaps than you think. Although Boaz is an exemplary man. Boaz is perhaps one of, if not the greatest example of godliness and faithfulness in the whole time period of the Judges, and is to be honored that way. But the star of the show is Ruth. And it's the extraordinary story. And you've got some, propaganda thing going on here. David's great-grandmother is a Moabitess. With Deuteronomy, that could seem a little awkward. Well, how can we just accept that, our great king has a not insignificant Moabite percentage here? Well, it's because she abandoned her people. She renounced her people to become as an Israelite. She affirmed her commitment to Naomi and to Yahweh, the God of Israel, in the midst of deep distress and difficult circumstances. And God honored her, and God has made her part of the great story. Because not only is she the great-grandmother of David, that means she is an ancestor of Jesus the Christ. And that's exactly what Matthew will bring out in Matthew chapter 1 in his genealogy, where he will explicitly identify Ruth in that lineage of Jesus. And it's a great reminder how God looks upon people and their faith and is willing to bring in those who may be of the nations, but who recognize who he is and have faith in him. And therefore we do well to have that kind of faith, to attach ourselves to God, to fulfill his purposes in Christ, and to take great encouragement from this example of Ruth, the ancestor of Jesus, and the faith that she displayed, and the way God honored her and rewarded her for that faith. We're so glad that you've joined us. We hope that you've been benefited by this. If you have any questions or comments about the story of Ruth, we'd love to hear about it. Let us know in the comments. Keep the conversation going. Please just share the message if you found it beneficial. Subscribe to us. I'm Ethan with the Venice Church of Christ. We're a non-denominational church of Christians in Los Angeles, and we'd love to be of encouragement to you in any way we can. Can we pray for you? Would you like to study the Bible with us? Would you like to meet with us? Is there something else we can do for you? Please let us know. Reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org. You can also find us on various social media at Venice Church or Venice Church of Christ. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you until we're able to meet again.